So, hello everybody, and thank you so much for being with us. It is 2 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get underway. I am Laura De Palma, the marketing manager here at Renew International, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Danny Collum, the author of our newest resource, No Throwaway People. He is a regular columnist for U.S. Catholic, and he was also a staffer and columnist for Sojourners until 2022 and is the author of 3 books about race in America. He is going to share a little bit more about himself when I turn it over to him. But I do want to say we're also joined today by Deacon Charles Paulino, our own managing editor here at Renew, as well as Meredith, our Vice President of Pastoral Services, and Joseph Nuzzi, the President of Renew International. Lots of people here today. Before we get started and I turn it over to Danny, I just want to cover a few quick housekeeping items. I do ask that you please keep yourselves muted during the main webinar, just so that conversation can flow smoothly. The chat box will be open for the whole session, so if you have any questions that you'd like me to ask on your behalf, any technical difficulties, any comments, anything at all that I can be helpful with, that's what I'm here for. So shoot me a message in the chat box. I'm happy to help. We will be recording this session as well in case we have anybody who was joining late, who would like to share it with other people, who missed it altogether and would like to watch it later. And that link will be sent out probably within 1 to 2 days. So definitely keep an eye out for that in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with anyone. And my last note is that there will be breakout rooms included in today's webinar so that we can do actual small group faith sharing just for about 10 minutes. So if you see an invitation pop up on your screen to join a small group, please go ahead and do so. That is everything I have for you. If you need any assistance at all, anything you need, questions, comments, technical difficulties, I will be only too happy to help you with that. So please hit me with that in the chat box. Otherwise, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Danny Collum.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for that introduction. And yeah, I told her I was going to say a little bit about myself before I had timed my talk, and now I'm not going to do that. But I will just say that this subject matter has been so. She said I wrote 3 books about it. Has been so much a part of my work. The roots of that go back to my childhood in my Southern Baptist childhood in Mississippi. And that's a story that actually was published in the Lamp magazine a couple of years ago. So if you want to look it up, you can. Um, but I'm going to jump right in to the business at hand. Um, when I say racism, what's your reaction? What's your first thought, first word, visceral, any feeling, synonyms, whatever. Uh, what pops in your head? Um, if that's something you're willing to write down and have something, put it in the chat, and Laura will, be going through those, and we might talk about some of them as we go on this afternoon. So start with that. Um, Now, I'm going to just now go into the kind of an overview of the content of this resource that I had the good fortune to do with Renew. Um, the first kind of overarching uh, aim that I had in doing this, and really in anything I do for a Catholic audience these days, was to encourage, inspire, cajole, nudge people to look to the church uh, for understanding and even information about current issues and controversies, especially when they're moral questions like this one, or social and questions of social morality. Um, don't go first to your cable news channel or your favorite influencer or podcaster online. Nothing wrong with that. I've got those too. Well, not for cable news, but but the idea is that the church has been thinking and praying and teaching and studying about these questions for centuries, and especially, since Leo the 13th, in a really deliberate way, trying to help Catholic Christians make sense out of their world. On the foundation of Catholic resources, Catholic intellectual resources, the Catholic moral vision. As a result, if you go through this book, you'll see that I make very generous use of, especially of Open Wide Our Hearts, the pastoral letter on racism that came from our U.S. Catholic bishops in 2018. That's not entirely because I'm in Central Kentucky, by the way. That's not entirely because our Archbishop here was Archbishop Fobb was the chair of the committee that oversaw that resources. And I think I would be recommending it even regardless of that. But so yeah, think and act with the church is the main starting point. All right. If we're going to do that, what does the church think? How has the church acted? You can go on, Laura. And the church has opposed discrimination from the beginning. The church, it's a core identity of the church, the Christian church, that it is a community of all humanity, of the whole human family. Um, Goes rooted in the teachings of Jesus, right? The story he told about the Good Samaritan that you see there. And certainly for the Christian community that arose in the wake of the resurrection and ascension. Um, it was there. This was a question from the very beginning as Gentiles started to become Christian. And the council in Jerusalem, the first church council, said, um, there's nothing special, genetically unique about Jews, and there's nothing unique or salvific about Jewish cultural practices. The Gentiles don't have to become Jews to be Christians. They're fine the way they are, just for adhering to basic Christian morality. Um, and so we are from the beginning a multi-ethnic, multicultural community that has aspired to be universal. A lot of ambiguity with that, a lot of fits and starts and failures, but that's the ideal from the beginning. And that's it in the book. I especially refer to um, the book of Acts and Peter's vision of all the different animals falling out of the sky and being told to eat them. Uh, and that's where this all starts. Um, in the ancient world of the first Christians, race, as we think of it, was not so much a concept. Um, there were different cultures, nationalities, tribes. They had conflicts and jealousies and so forth, certainly. And that kind of uh, conflict, prejudices, ordinary prejudices are kind of eternal and universal. But go on, Laura. The key thing to think about in for Americans especially is that racism is not a fact of nature. It's not written in the stars. It's not inherent uh, that in anything in the human gene pool or anything that white people are going to look down on black people as inferior. That there's going to be the what Brian Stevenson calls the presumption of guilt when white people see a black man on the street. That's none of that's natural. None of that was really necessary part of American life even before it was America in the colonies. Um, Came about in the late 1600s, early 1700s, in response to the particular situation that most of the right our ideas about of racism and practices and kind of psychology really come to justify the practice of universal slavery for life for African people. And that was not what was happening in the Virginia colony for the first 50 years. Um, the Africans who came to Virginia for the most part were living and working as indentured servants, just like most of the white people in the Virginia colony were. Um, Started to change after 1676 when there was a rebellion of black and white indentured servants, poor, impoverished former indentured servants with no land, uh, formed an army, burned down the capital of Jamestown, as you see in the image there. Nathaniel Bacon was the leader. It was called Bacon's Rebellion. In the wake of that, the Virginia House of Burgesses, the legislature, began to create laws to institutionalize um, slavery for life for African people. Before that, in English law, slavery for life was only for non-Christians, and a Christian could not be enslaved for life. In the Virginia colony, they removed that. They imposed slavery on all people of African descent and put in some little favors, some improvements of conditions for the poor whites. And out of that grew to justify that system and all the cruelties that eventually came with it. We developed these pathology of racism and white supremacy. But it wasn't there from the beginning. It's not um, inevitable. It came about to divide workers for the benefit of an elite. And if it was done, it could be undone. So that's uh, another the key fact because you can't, in thinking about, I think that's just like really important in thinking about this because it's not, just a spiritual or psychological issue. So, it has historical roots. So at this point, I'm going to stop this and let Laura take over for a little bit.
So, Danny, very briefly before we move on from what you were talking about,
Mhm.
we had a question come in about if the church has been anti-discrimination from the very beginning, what about the Christian Crusades and the doctrine of discovery?
Well,
How do they
yeah,
answer that?
yeah. I tried to. I kind of glossed over that with that line about kind of ambiguities and failures and so forth. Yeah, it's human history. It's a mess. Yeah, and it's been There's been terrible things. The Catholic Church on slavery was not that great for most of the time that slavery was being practiced in the New World in the way that I just described. Um, so there's a lot to repent for. I think our recent popes have even done some confessions and some penances for some of those historic sins of the human church. Yeah, that's all true.
Were those really the teachings that the Bible presented, or were those the way that we exploited it almost, the way that we interpreted it and used it?
Um, the You mean in terms of like the Crusades? Uh, yeah, I think that was a I'm not a medieval historian, so I couldn't say too much about that. Obviously, Christian anti-Semitism, was came along, and that about a little starting before that even, but certainly during that time, and that was been obviously a terrible stain on the record of the church as well. Um, but I don't think there's anything inherent. No, there's nothing as I've seen it, and there's nothing inherent in the witness of Scripture, certainly the New Testament, that justifies some of these, for instance, the Crusades, um, or the tolerance of the slave trade, for that matter. That was also something that was true of the church.
Thank you so much, Danny.
Hmm.
So we're going to move into a brief faith sharing opportunity here. And I'm going to take just a moment. I know we had a lot of our guests join us in the last 10 minutes or so, maybe after we started the webinar. So first of all, I'd like to welcome you. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And in case you missed it at the beginning, what we're about to do is we're going to take a look at the two questions that you see now on your screen, and then we're going to split up into small groups. And we're going to take about 10 to 12 minutes just to talk about your reactions to these questions. And the purpose of this is to delve into your own ideas about them, but also to show you kind of the way No Throwaway People is structured and how it would work in your parish, in your community, in your small groups. Every session in the book has questions like this. This is what we use to bring people together, to help them reflect upon their ideas and grow and learn from each other and really come to understand each other. And I would also like to thank the people who answered Danny's original question. And before we jump into the questions for faith sharing, I'm just going to read out some of the answers about people's kind of their knee jerk, their instinctive reaction to racism in America today. And some of the answers we had were that it's sinful and heretical, irrational hatred, it's rampant, it's based in ignorance. One person wrote that they feel a tightness in their stomach, just their physical reaction to racism. It's evil. It brings forth sadness and anger. So there's just a lot of knee jerk, even just emotions that you feel when we talk about it. So if any of those ideas help you as we move forward, I'll go ahead and read these questions we have. What are some ways that are our own communities, churches, neighborhoods, workplaces, and I'll expand on that, your families, your friend groups, any group that you're a part of, still reflect the racial divisions that were established centuries ago? And what steps can we take to change this? And then, what are the relationships among people of different racial identities in your community or your parish? And how are these relationships consistent or inconsistent with your understanding of the gospel? So in just a moment, you're going to see a invitation to join a breakout group pop up on your screen, and I invite you to go ahead and join them. And I will give you a warning as we're coming towards the end of our time for discussion. So welcome back, everybody. I know we have everybody rejoining us, so I'm going to give just a moment to make sure that everyone is fully connected. And before I run through and start muting everybody again, I'd first like to ask if anyone had any key takeaways that they'd like to share. You can feel free to write it in the chat if you would prefer that I present it, or you can just go ahead and share it with us. Anybody? I know it's much easier to talk freely in your small groups. This is part of why we encourage small group faith sharing so much, because it's so much easier to highlight ideas and feel free to speak your mind in small groups. But if anyone has anything they'd like to share, Jimmy, I see a hand raised.
Yeah, we've had people from all over the country, and but a common theme was that the church, even in the churches that are more diverse, the music, the art, the background is very much Eurocentric. We don't recognize other cultures. Uh, you'd be hard pressed to tell that that was a Catholic church. It's just Eurocentric.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
This didn't come up in our group, but I was just wondering, for books or Bible studies and stuff like that, I don't see a lot of brown or black people authors. I know I pushed back on the what's it called, Word on Fire Institute when it came out, and I was
Hmm.
like, why are all your educators white and generally men? And they're like, well, because that's sort of the academic requirements. And I was like, well, that's frustrating because faith is not only academic. And I got nowhere with that. So I've tried it with Dynamic Catholic. I tend to get nowhere with that conversation as
Hmm.
well.
Mm.
Melanie, I would suggest Brian Massengale's Racism in the Catholic Church is a wonderful book. I just finished one, and I can't think of the name of it now, but the author's name is Matthew Kappa DeConnell, and he talks about how the church still deals with racism. And to do a book study on books like that, and uh, golly, Dr. Shannon D. Williams did one called Subversive Habits that talks about black nuns and the history of black nuns in the United States. So there's plenty of good books out there. Just got to look for them. Unfortunately, they're not readily available.
Jimmy, would you mind dropping those in the chat?
Yes, not a problem. I'm going to actually put a link to our website. I'm in a group called Virginia Catholics for Racial Justice, and our website has all that stuff. So I'll just put that in there, and then you can explore it.
Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anybody else have any thoughts, questions, or ideas from their small group that they'd like to share with the larger group?
I like that one thought. Um, I just was thinking if there was going to be a patron saint for this kind of um, outreach ministry, what have you, Father Augustus Tolton would be the guy.
Mm.
I mean, I think most people know who he is, but he was African American, um, early, one of the first, if not the first, ordained in the United States. It was quite a story. Emptied himself out for love of people.
Yeah, the first
Was he the first?
African American that could, there were other African American uh, priests, but they didn't look African American. They looked white. The Healy brothers. So, but yeah, there are 7 candidates, African American candidates for canonization in the
Oh,
church.
well,
Uh, but if we don't even know about them, how are we supposed to pray to them for intercession so we can get a miracle attributed to them? So it's kind of a catch-22 in that sense. But we talked about Augustus Tolton in our group, and we talked about Thea Bowman. Uh, but there's 7 total right now.
Well, thank you everybody for sharing all of your comments. I'm going to turn it back over to Danny for just a few more minutes.
Okay.
But again, as always, if you have any questions, any comments, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will be happy to share them on your behalf. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Laura. Thanks to everyone for your sharing. The next thing I want to look at, yeah, is because this actually I did a different version of this study guide for Renew in the I think 1997 is when it was published, I think, or thereabouts. Um, and it has, I think the title was something like Beyond Black and White.
Hmm.
Uh, and you were able to think about, at least I was still able to think about racism in America as primarily a black and white matter. And that's obviously with the immigration that we've increasingly experienced over that time. It's not everything doesn't fit that grid anymore. However, this kind of color consciousness of this is a white man's country, uh, and a black man has no rights that any white man is required to honor. That was in the Dred Scott decision, returning the fugitive slaves back in the 1800s from the decision of the Supreme Court. Um, so that consciousness, that sense of this is a white man's country, um, has been a factor in how America has dealt with immigration, at least since the time that the Chinese workers were being brought in to build the railroads. Um, the first 100 years, 200 years, even almost, go and use count the colonial era. Um, there were no immigration requirements. You just, you showed up and you went to work and you started learning English, and that was and you ended up an American. And there was no, there was, if anything, like a y'all come attitude. Of course, immigration was coming from Northern Europe in those first decades. Um, as the Chinese came, and then shortly after that, later in the 19th century rather, of course, there was the first racialized immigration law, the Chinese Exclusion Act, uh, and then later at the 19th century, and especially the early 20th century, there was a huge wave of immigration from Southern Europe, and especially Italians and Jews were considered, not quite white, in some circles. I know certainly the one I grew up in, the Italian and Syrian and Lebanese immigrants that were in our river town were, they were white for the purposes of, what school you go to and things like that. But they were definitely set apart. So there was that color consciousness, that sense of white supremacy was, part began to be part of how we dealt with immigration. And by 1924, uh, there was the foreign-born part of the U.S. population was 20%, which is about what it is now. And there was a kind of a rebellion against this on the part of, the white majority of voters in Congress passed a law that restricted immigration from Southern Europe and from pretty much all of the non-white world. Uh, there were immigration quotas, and Northern Europe got really good quotas, and everybody else got really skimpy ones. And that held until 1965. In the wake of the Civil Rights Movement, we got an immigration law that reversed that, and became, more open to the rest of the world. And that's how that's the world we live in now. So when it's come from those 60 years of um, immigration from Africa, African immigrants who aren't, never experienced the American slave system, from the Caribbean, which was, of course, a slave system, from South Asia. We get millions of immigrants now who aren't white and they aren't African American. So they don't, but the grid of white supremacy still, it gets applied in some significant ways. So that's how we've kind of ended up with this situation where uh, people can be. The Supreme Court has ruled that it's okay for people to be stopped and asked to prove their immigration status on the basis of their ethnic appearance, their skin color, speaking Spanish, speaking English with a Spanish accent. Yeah. So we've got I think the same psychology, the same pathology that we created, the monster we created to justify slavery in the early 1700s, is still at work there, and we need to think about that. But there are also around immigration. There's a lot of other things at work there too. There's real concern about wage stagnation and job loss and so forth among a lot of people too. a lot of white Americans. But Immigration is definitely, a racialized issue that has to be dealt with in those terms in America today. And obviously, that's where, in the Catholic churches that I see here in Kentucky, that's who the non-white Catholic population is: African immigrants, and obviously Hispanic in very large numbers. Um, so uh, that kind of puts a layer of complication on the whole issue, and makes it maybe even a little thornier for us to deal with it. But there are ways that of dealing with this and help people moving forward. And our churches have, in some cases, led on that in some ways that we may not be as aware of now. But Go to the last one, Laura. Um, as I said, when I was talking about how racism was a fact of a historical phenomenon that was created, and that if it's done, it can be undone. Uh, and the way it can be undone is with organization. One example of that would be, of course, what the civil rights movement, which the image here shows. This is from the 1963 March on Washington, which the whole title for that march, August 28th, 1963, was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. So it was kind of coordinated by Bayard Rustin, who's a labor activist, and especially worked with A. Philip Randolph, the leading black trade unionist of the last half of the 20th century. The idea was that the economic division of the working class, that has started in the 16 1700s, could be overcome by people working together in their common interests. And the 63 March was mostly coming up from the South, and because it was just after the four little girls were blown up in Birmingham at 16th Street Baptist Church. But there was also that was when uh, the trade union movement in America, especially the AFL-CIO, the UAW had been there for a long time. The AFL-CIO got seriously behind the civil rights movement. There were busloads of union workers. They were, coming from the North. They were predominantly white. That kind of bolstered the numbers of that crowd in 1963. Another example, more current, contemporary, is congregation-based community organizing, which I'm sure somebody here is familiar with, involved with. And This is a way of people coming into civic action, community action through their congregation in partnership with other congregations. So even if the congregations are segregated or, historically black and still mostly white, uh, they are going to they're going to cooperate and work together and hash things out with people from other backgrounds. And they're like, the best numbers I saw recently, there's like 5 million people involved in these kinds of organizations around the country. And at one time, the Catholic churches were really the leading edge of this movement. That's kind of subsided, uh, unfortunately, in recent years. But this is still a very vital strategy that works, and that allows people to improve their communities and in the process come into relationships with people very different from themselves and come to realize how much they have in common. And what they have in common is so much greater than the differences that have been imposed on them. So that's kind of where the book ends up. It's where pretty much everything I write ends up in terms of recommending a course of action. Yeah, so that's kind of an overview of the resource. I mean, it's obviously, pretty quick and dirty, and there's uh, a lot more to it. But with the time that we could have, those were, I thought, the really important points that I want you to know were highlighted in this resource. So, Laura.
Thank you so much, Danny, for that overview and for being with us today. Again, if anyone has any parting questions, any parting comments, I invite you to put them in the chat. We still have a few minutes left, so I'm happy to discuss anything that may come up. I also understand, and I meant to say this when we came back from small groups, I did post the questions in the chat, but I understand that they did not necessarily get broadcast even in the chat box to the people in the chat. So I apologize for any inconvenience that was, as well as I know there was some audio overlap. So I will be reaching out to Zoom to work on these glitches in the future, but I do apologize for any inconvenience that there was in the small groups. But besides from that, I do want to thank Danny one final time for being with us today and for his brief and dirty overview, as he puts it, of his own resource. If anyone would like to explore it today, there is a QR code on the screen. You can also keep an eye out in the coming days. We will be sending out a follow-up email to the webinar with a link to the recording in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with anybody. In case this is of any concern, the small groups are not shared as part of the recording. That is a private conversation, but everything else will be shared. And it will also have a link to the resource in it as well. So I thank you all so much for being here with us today. And I hope you have a wonderful week to come and a coming weekend. Happy Mother's Day to all our mothers.
Thank you so much.
And to any men with wives or mothers, consider this your reminder. Don't forget Mother's Day is Sunday. But no, thank you all so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. And I'm here if you've got any questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Thanks. Laura, I had a question.
Yes.
The woman that kind of, I'll say, runs evangelization in our church, we look through No Throwaway People. Our parish is 95% Caucasian, and we just thought what we were hoping for is that there was no throwaway people across multiple categories. We thought this one for us is probably too focused on race. Like, we'd love to be
Okay.
here, but we think we have baby steps before we got there. So I recently got one called from Renew, Many Voices, One Spirit. Do you think that might be a good, like, do you have others that you'd recommend sort of for us to start with?
I think Many Voices, One Spirit is a great starting point. And Melanie, I'm also going to include, I'm so glad you said this. I'll include in the follow-up email is a link to our complete social justice collection, because we do have other books that focus maybe not on race, but on other issues of social justice. So I think Many Voices, One Spirit is a great, great place to start. And if you're looking for any follow-up resources after that, I would maybe recommend exploring that collection. I think there's maybe 5 to 6 different resources. So there might be some other options there that focus not only on race, but also on other issues. And if Meredith is still on, Meredith, if you'd like to say anything about In the Light of Justice, I know that that focuses on a variety of topics. So that one might be a really good option, In the Light of Justice.
Hi, Melanie. So In the Light of Justice is a series on it's Catholic social teaching, but it does bring in the issues of race.
Thanks, Jimmy.
I would also say, this is Joe Nitze from Renew. Um, I was a catechist professionally for 25 years, and I wouldn't shy away from something like this in a community that's predominantly white. I worked in a parish that was, oh my God, almost 100% white. um, because the issue touches our society, and so I wouldn't on that basis alone not look at it because it affects all of us whether we realize it or not. And it's an element of it's sort of an element of privilege that, if we were to say, well, I'm not hungry, therefore issues of hunger don't affect me. Well, obviously issues of hunger we should all feel kind of we should all feel responsible for that issue. So I would just put it out there as to say, I wouldn't let that alone. I think this could be having read it, I think it could be a fruitful resource for any composition of any parish, or small communities.
Thank you, Joe. Anybody else have any questions or comments that I can help with? Okay, well, I will linger. I'll hang around for a minute or two in case anyone is typing a message I don't want to miss. But otherwise, I once again thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you.